ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to a very special episode of the Blue Abroad podcast. Haven't done a audio podcast for a while, so it's good to get back into the swing of things on this platform. And today I've got a very special guest. He goes by the name of Jono Baruch. Jono, are you there, mate?
I'm Terry. How you doing? Thanks for having me.
Mate, I'm doing very well as I can be without the footy. What about you, mate?
How you getting your isolation?
Look, it's I've been saying it for a couple of weeks now. It's first few days, maybe a week or so, you give yourself that time to feel the sadness and the anger and all those emotions and the depression, and then at some point you just got to wake up and get on with it. So that's my mentality. What about you?
It's been a bit difficult to adjust to. I've been working from home now for the last 5 weeks, so my bosses were a bit ahead of the government in terms of ruling everyone to stay at home. But I've just been adjusting to getting back to the swing of things and trying to stay sane and mental. I think the only person in my house that's actually happy that we're all at home at the moment is the dog, because her average walks have gone from about 0-1 a day to about 3 to 4 walks a day, because people just want to get out of the house. So she's absolutely loving it at the moment. So, but yeah, we're all finding our ways to adjust and finding ways to have the substitute for no sport, which is really driving me insane. I'm sure it's driving you insane as well.
Yeah, it sure is. I mean, I did just watch episode 1 and 2 of the Chicago Bulls documentary. So that's it took me away from reality for a couple of hours, which was good. And like you said, all we really have in this time is now we get the chance to, look, you can obviously look at it as a negative, or we can look at it as an opportunity to sort of sit back, reflect on life, and in our situation with this podcast, the footy, our beloved Carlton Footy Club. And so that's what the purpose of today is. We're going to look back on what was, I should say, unfortunately, the best year of the decade, really.
Yeah, and this was highlighted by a piece I wrote for you guys a little bit earlier in the week. We had a look back at season 2011, which, as I put it, it was our last winning season for a long time. It was the last time that we, made the finals on our own merit. It was the last time we played well in winning finals and actually looked likely to have a shot at winning it all. So I thought, we're using this time, why not have a look back and relive some good times? Because, as Carlton supporters, have been bereft of some good times for the last 20 years. So let's have a look back and try pull it apart and say, what worked well, what didn't go well, and just what might have been. And I think as we go through and work through, we'll come to realize that this was a really big missed opportunity. And there are multiple reasons as why I think it was possibly our biggest missed opportunity in a while. And it's interesting, to pull it all back. And, I don't know where you were at the time. And in 2011, I was actually in year 11. So the years lined up kind of well. And it was proving to be a very welcome distraction from year 12. And, as year 11 and as your team's going well, life's good at that point in time. So it's just a matter of looking back on it now with a fresh lens, and instead of being, caught up in the whole, we're in the top 4, we're staying around the top 4, we're going to go play finals and you're going to go deep into the year. Let's look back now, critical lens on it, analyze what went well, what didn't go so well, and let's get into it.
Yeah, for sure. I do want to give a bit of context to those who are listening. So, Jono, why don't you give us a bit of context? Tell us a little bit about your involvement in the sports media world. And obviously you did write an article for the Blue Abroad platform, which is on the Facebook page. If you haven't read that, please go to the Facebook page. It's pinned to the top of the page. So it's the first article there. And Jono was good enough to put together a piece for us to reflect on. So, Jono, tell us a little bit about yourself and your involvement in this sport world.
Yeah, well, it's very, very quick, to be honest. I'm still finding my feet, but I studied Bachelor of Sports Management and Business at university, and I guess I've always had this interest in doing something in sport. And during my last year of university, I decided to, instead of doing my university assignments, start writing about football and writing about different sport. And I ended up liking it. And the people that were good enough to read my work said I'm actually quite good at it. So I kept on writing. And whilst I'm not working in sports media at the moment, I'm still writing because I enjoy it and building up my portfolio. And I thought if you're going to write something about something you're passionate about, then you're probably going to put a lot of time and love into it. And that led me to approaching you and Dan and writing that piece about the Blues, which has been very well received. And thanks to everyone out there so far who's left a comment or a like. It's really, really well appreciated. It's really appreciated.
Yep, absolutely, mate. Well, look, without further ado, we'll get stuck into it. I guess the starting point is to look a little bit, not too far back, but obviously we had come from the rebuild, the number one draft picks, the Chris Judd acquisition. We had then started building a little bit. We had played finals in 2009. We had lost that thanks to a Daniel Bradshaw dagger. We then had another season in the finals the year after in 2010, where we lost that elimination final against the Swans. And then we get to 2011. So give us a little bit about the beginning, the themes, the issues, and let's go from there.
Yeah, well, as you mentioned, there were the two finals in 09 and 10, and they were real, as you put it perfectly, daggers to the heart, losing two finals by under a goal interstate when you play so well for 3/4 of the game. And the pressure was mounting. Our coach back then, Brett Radden, was entering the last year of his contract and was given the words by Steve Kernahan and probably the rest of the media is like, you have to win a final to keep your job. And if you look at the list that we had back then, the top end of it was really, really good. You had Judd, who'd just come off a Brownlow. Mark Murphy was about to enter his prime, as was Bryce Gibbs. The midfield engine room of Andy Carazzo, Mitch Robinson was entering his third year. You still had Heath Scotland and a fella by the name of Cade Simpson, who was back running through the midfield back then. So we knew we had the top end of the list to really go well, and it was those guys who had performed well in the finals in 09 and 010. And of course, Matthew Cruiser was to return a little bit later in the year. 2011 was a pretty quirky season. Let's remember, it was the first year of having the Gold Coast Suns in, and it was the year before Greater Western Sydney. So there were 17 teams, which meant they needed to accommodate more weeks. So there were 24 rounds in the season, and each team had 2 byes. And as we work through this, we'll come out that our 2 byes both would come at the worst possible time for us, when we need momentum and we need to keep building momentum. And the byes would just come along, and there'd just be, our footy fans like, oh, the AFL's out to get us, and they'd like perfectly timed our byes to like kill off any momentum that we might have and finish any good things that we might need to do. So that's one thing that really comes to pass when you're looking back on it. And just, I guess, another theme, is that you looked at different parts, and it was still in the post-Favola years of the football club, where we were really looking for that big target up for. We had Eddie Betts, we just found Jeff Garlett, and Chris Yarran was starting to find his feet at the level 2. But we were really still searching for that target that could move and jump and take a big mark. And that's when we put Andrew Walker up in the forward line, which, if we jumped towards the end of the year, he ended up kicking over 50 goals this year. So it was a bit of a new Carlton look about it, but they had that foundation of knowing what they needed to do, and now it was just a matter of doing it.
Yeah, 100%. I think you hit the nail on the head. It was a transformative forward line. We were obviously still licking our wounds from the Favola exit just because of the way it happened, and obviously he was a favourite son. And I mean, look, at the time, I remember it being a very bold move. I remember thinking, this is a really big call, and, strong clubs make strong calls, and, we are the Carlton Football Club, and you alluded to that Carlton mentality just then. And, we did have that, I guess if you want to call it the old Carlton arrogance back, whereby we're talking about finals, we're talking about we've got to make top four, otherwise it's a failed season. And that was welcomed by us because we all bought in, because that's who we are. That's the ethos of the Carlton Football Club. We're a successful club. It's a premiership or nothing. And that was back after so many years of it being, oh God, salary cap, we're coming back, number one draft picks. We've got to wait for these number one draft picks to peak a little bit, then we'll be up there. So it seemed like there was a build. It seemed like, okay, 2 finals exits. We've got that finals disappointment. And I know we're in.
It looked like in these couple of years going on that, Brett Ratton was building its team and it was going to reach its crescendo at some point, whether it be 211, 212, 213. The list was there and it was good enough. It was missing a few little bits and we'll cover it as we go along. But it just maybe needed one of those 2 layers that hopefully we'd find in, 2011. And you look back on the numbers, we ended up using a fair portion of our list. We used 40 players in 2011.
Yep.
So it's not like we weren't trying lots of things or trying different people in different roles. We, as I mentioned before, we threw Walker forward, Lockie Henderson moved to the back line, Chris Yarrow moved to the back line. We recruited a few good mature age recruits in Jeremy Laidler, Nick Dygan, and Ed Kerno as well, who came to the club that year. So we'd try to fill out a little bit around the edges of where we needed to and try to, as a coaching mechanism, coaching words, spin the magnets around a little bit. But it was still trying to find that perfect balance of teams. And as we move throughout the year, which we're going to get into now, it really uncovers that is something that still seems to be a problem today, which is a lack of quality depth.
Yep, absolutely. You named those names perfectly. The only other one that I would say, because we had 12 ins that year, so Nick Dygan, Ed Kerno, and Jeremy Laidler, I believe, were the notables who came in and probably were the ones that, were in our best 22 by the end of the year. So,
well, all of them.
Yeah.
Were Ed Kerno, who got injured. Laidler and Dygan played every game.
Mm-hmm. Now, Laidler we got him with pick 41, which we traded off 36 and 53 to get that pick. So,
yeah, Laidler arrived from Geelong.
Yes, he certainly did. All right, so let's have a crack at this. We won't go game by game, but I'll base it off the article, and then we'll because what you've done in that article is great in that you've gone through the checkpoints, I would call them, where we had patches of games that were good and certain notable games. Do you remember round 1 where it was just every year it was like, well, how much are we going to beat Richmond by this year? And those were those days. And so round 1 and 2 were just, all right, easy done. Gold Coast first game, and I'm looking at the score here.
It was a much simpler time, was it? Although I do remember when sitting there in round 1 and we've kicked, I don't know how many straight lines to start the year, and they've gone down the other end and kicked a couple of goals. And I turned to my uncle. I always go to the footy with my uncle, and I turned to him and I'm like, well, this is going to be interesting. And Carlton, inaccurate year. But as we said, we got it done eventually. The Gold Coast first ever game, that was always, you'd put that one in the book, I think. And then comes the interesting part, so we have the blockbusters against Collingwood, the reigning premiers. I don't think anyone expected us to get up in that game. And I remember thinking after I'd, checked the scores on the paper the next day, I didn't watch the game because I was out at front, Shovers dinner. But it was almost like, we got within 5 goals, and that's where I thought we were at, especially at the end of last year. I didn't think, okay, yeah, we'd make the finals. But at that point in the year, they would have been obviously disappointed with the loss and a loss to Collingwood, what have you. But they would have thought, it was like, okay, maybe we can do that. And the following week when we drew against Essendon, I think if you remember the closing moments of that game, Jeff Garlett takes a mark inside 50, goes to take off and gets run down by Dustin Fletcher. Then
the signature run on too. It was what he did. He left his opponents in their wake, and it was like, all right, well, Dustin Fletcher, you think Jeff Garlett's got him covered, and fair play to Dustin Fletcher. We do hate Essendon, but it was a really good passage of play from a neutral footy observer.
It was something that we pride ourselves on. It was free flowing, high speed, and to have guys like Betts and Garlett in that forward line, that's what they had the license to do. Get it and go and put it through. So congrats to Fletcher. But the draw then and there was really like, okay, we have to wake up here. We want to make something of this season and keep our coach, who we'll get to it in a bit. But if you look back on this year and say, geez, Rats was ahead of his time with some of the coaching moves and the way our forward line was structured.
Yeah. Well, we moved the ball so quickly. We had speed, and I know the Gold Coast game is a bit of an anomaly because it was their first season, but we scored 171 that game. We scored 184 in a game against Richmond, which we'll obviously get to, but we scored over 100 points quite a few times in the year, which is something we look back on now in 2020. And, we've just come off that, that streak of not being able to score 100 points. So, it was good.
We kicked 100 points 10 times in 2011.
Wow.
10 times.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. So Essendon happens, and then we go and we play against the Crows the year after in a 6-point thrilling win, which I think from your recount, it was a good win. And I remember watching this game back, and I remember watching them sing the song after the game, and you could just tell there was a bit of a flat tone to the way they sung the song, almost as if it wasn't good enough. We got away with one there. Do you recall that?
I do. I remember getting to this game, and I left after Shabbat, and we get to this game. We're a few goals up, and I just remember the game going a little bit back and forth. And at the start of the fourth quarter, I think we were up by about 4 goals. I'll have to check this. Then Adelaide come in and hit the front, and this was back in the day when obviously you've got the counter clocks at the game, but it was back in the day where it would have been the old 5-minute warning on TV. So at the start of the 5 minutes, Adelaide go up by about 8 points. So we need two goals to win it. And I'm just sitting there thinking, going, oh, geez, what's going to happen now? We're going to start the year, 2-1 2, I think. And it's just not going to be good. And I remember, I think it was Jordan Russell who gets the ball on the left flank, from 50 out, and just lets rip. And I don't know why, but I didn't really. Jordan Russell wasn't the most fondest player we've ever had on our list from me, and I just remember he kicked that goal and he wins us the game. And obviously, you've won a close game. It's the euphoria of like, thank God we won. How freaking good is this? But it's also like, and you're right. The players definitely got away with one there. And it's like, okay, great. Our season's back on track, but we've just we have to switch on. And, and if it wasn't the draw last week, that was the real kick up the bum that they needed, then this week would have definitely been that. And I think in the weeks ahead, the next week was Judd at the Royal Wedding. And I think that was really the night where Juddy said, you know what, we're here. We're going to come and make a statement and really try make amends. And to their credit, to this point in the year, they're winning games. They're in the top 4 or around the top 4. And it's something that, number one, we never really experienced before. We're not used to being that high up on the ladder. I hadn't been used to being high up on the ladder for quite some time. But it felt like almost that we were there because, there was the top rung. You had Geelong and Collingwood that year who were the clear pace setters. And then it was, the Carltons, the Hawthorns, the St Kildas, the Fremantles that year, I think, were very, very good. So those were the types of teams that were sort of jostling for those next few positions, the West Coast, I'm sorry. And it was just, you needed that moment to prove. And it was like, okay, we're here and we can actually hold our own here. We can hold our own sitting in the top 4, being entrenched in the top 4, mind you. We just need something, and that's going to come. We don't know when, but it's going to come.
Yeah, so we have the 2 away games, which I think is checkpoint number 1, because we've obviously had a good start. We've had a draw. We've had a an escaping win against the Crows. Then we go and we have 2 away games. The first one, as you mentioned just then, is the Royal Wedding game against the Swans, the Chris Judd virtuoso performance in the wet from memory. The following week is against the Saints, and the Saints were obviously coming off. That was peak St Kilda. Really, that was the best St Kilda team of that sort of era, that 2, 3, 4 year period. And we come away victorious in both games, both relatively close games. We beat the Swans by 16. We beat St Kilda by 3.
Yeah.
And the point you made just previous about the buys coming at the wrong time. Well, here's buy number 1. So we've won 3 in a row. Yes, the Adelaide game wasn't our best performance, but we beat the Swans away. We beat St Kilda, which was an away game, still in Melbourne, but an away game. And then we have a bye. And so we're looking good. We've got some disappointing performances, but nothing too drastic because we haven't lost a bad loss, unless you count the Collingwood loss as a bad loss, which I personally didn't and still don't, because again, like you said, we're still building. They're the best team in the comp. Keep it within 5 goals and you're sort of there or thereabouts.
Yeah, correct. And at this point, we're 3rd on the ladder as well. So we're keeping pace with them. It's just, we're keeping pace with them because we're that good, or there isn't much competition behind those 2 pace setters in Collingwood and Geelong.
Mm-hmm.
So
exactly right.
So yeah, but then the next game, which I've written down in the pieces, this is the night where I think it really came to us, and it's like, okay, we're a good team this year. So I don't know if you remember much from this night, other than Judd goes off injured in the second quarter, only to come back and for Dennis Committee to go, how does he manage this? It's supernatural. When he
what a moment. I was there at the game. I'll never forget when it went through. It was very similar to the moment in the 2013 elimination final, just sort of late in game. You know, it's Geelong. Obviously, it was Richmond in 2013, and Judd has his moment where he kicked a goal. And every time he kicked a goal, there was a little extra, because remember when he came to the club, there was this roar in the crowd whenever he touched the ball.
It was unbelievable. And you see the way that game pans out, and I'll never ever forget the closing moments of this game. So the ball comes into the goal square. Robbie Warnock goes up for the mark, gets smacked in the head by Corey Enright, almost gets his head taken off, wins a free kick, top of the goal square. Carlton supporters start going absolutely mad. Now, bear in mind, I wasn't at this game, but a good friend of mine was at the game with his dad, and he tells me this story as clear as day. And whoever's seen Robbie Warnock take a shot for goal, it's almost areas like Levi 2016, whereas like it's going anywhere but goals. So he's screaming at Robbie, going, stay down, you're concussed, stay down. Sure enough, Robbie Warnock gets up, takes the kick, misses, and we go on to lose the game by 2 points. So aside from that tiny little mishap in the end, which ultimately I think you'd say cost us a 4. But
pretty much.
It was the game that you felt that it's like, okay, we can do this. And, you know, Mark Murphy's really starting to roll here and really start to get on board. Gibbs is going on. Simpson's kicking goals from the midfield. Our forward line is sharing around the goals everywhere. You know, we've got goals coming absolutely everywhere. We kicked 14 goals that night. You know, when was the last time we kicked 14, 15 goals in a loss up until season 2019? You know, it's something that we're playing a brand of footy that stacks up against these teams. And that was the night against a genuine contender, a team that we'd beaten in the last couple of years on the MCG. You know, we were here. We could do some damage. And over the next month and a bit, you know, we go on a bit of a mini tear, you know, play Melbourne at the MCG. Melbourne were rather toothless in that period. Port Adelaide away, you know, a last quarter blitz absolutely kills them off. Brisbane and Sydney, you know, on bright wintry afternoons at Marvel Stadium with the roof open. You know, they were some, if you want to use an old old term, it was like the days of our lives for Carlton fans. You know, you'd rock up to the game, we'd kick absolute bags of goals, would run out, would win. Our players were playing well. I watched highlights from that second Sydney game. It was Matthew Cruz's second game back off an ACL, and I reckon that is possibly the best game he's ever played.
Yep, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I remember being at that game too, and it was and again, so this is probably the other point. So all of a sudden we've done all of this work without Cruiser. Robbie Warnock, we had signed him to a 3-year deal. And, you know, he was a good tap ruckman. He was serviceable, but we always knew that Cruiser was the heart and soul in that engine room because of the things that he did at ground level, the blocking for the midfielders, etc. And so all of a sudden,
add up to Robbie Warnock and even Sean Hampson over that period, because they were both playing the role in the ruck. Hampson more up forward. They were very, very good cogs in this team, and they would prove to be important, you know, as we go ahead in the year. But it's just something that it was a real team mentality, and I think that got lost a little bit as we head on into the year, because it's around this time we'd been, you know, blessed up until this point of the year when we hadn't really had a serious injury. But from, I'd say, about round 13 onwards, that's when we slowly start to lose players, and that's when the game and the season almost had to become that squad mentality, which it did in a way. But
let's just pause there for a sec, because I want to make the point about Cruz. So we've done the work without him. He comes in, and you know, we've won 7 or 8 games at this point from the first 11 or 12, and we think, right, he's the other injection of the number 1 draft pick into the squad. And you're right, that Sydney game happens. We win 4 in a row.
Yep.
So we beat Melbourne after the Geelong game. We beat Port, as you said. We beat the Lions, and then we beat Sydney at home. And Cruiser's back, and we are 9-4 at the end of round 13. Sorry, 9-3 and a bye. 9-3 and a bye, and a draw.
We're humming. We're going absolutely beautifully, and then it sort of runs into that period where you go, "Oh, geez, this is gonna cost us." So West Coast at Etihad Stadium, as it was back then. Now, at this point, West Coast are climbing up the ladder. No one really thinks, oh, how well are they actually going to go, because they won the wooden spoon that year. Come to Etihad Stadium on the day, teach us a lesson how to play football, and Brett Thornton gets himself on a footy card for the rest of his life because Nick Nat took one of the biggest hangers I've ever seen.
He certainly did.
Yeah, so there's that, and sandwiched in between that, we did as we did back in that time. We beat Richmond by 103 points. And then
that was important. That was an important win. The reason why I say that is because my ethos has always been, when you have a disappointing performance, good teams have to respond. Now, we did it against, we drew against Essendon. We kind of responded against Adelaide, but obviously disappointing. And then after that Adelaide game, there was a bit of talk about we've got to be better. And we did get better against the Swans, and it was a gritty performance. And then obviously we lose that game to West Coast by almost 40. And then we smash Richmond. And this is the key point here. Have a read of this scoreline. 28 goals, 16, 184 to 12-9, 81. We scored 184 points in a game of football.
No, you absolutely nailed it. We simply just had to respond. And, you know, much like you mentioned earlier on in the year where we responded, but it was a game that we won, but we weren't happy with. Whereas this point, we absolutely tore them to shreds.
Yeah.
And it's something that, you know, we take pride in and bask in the glory of that, you know. Okay, yeah, you know, we beat Richmond by 103 points. Who doesn't love doing that? But it was the way that we responded, especially from the disappointment of the last week. Unfortunately, though, we can't quite back it up. And we then go on and lose to the Bulldogs, who were having a mini resurgence that year themselves. And then we run into Collingwood again. And we don't win because they're still far and away the best team in the competition that year. But 2 losses in a row, and West Coast keep winning. They're a very, very important part of the storyline. So while we are, you know, stuttering a little bit, West Coast are winning, and then all of a sudden the talk is they're going to become the first team in a long, long time to go from the wooden spoon to the top 4, and who knows how far they're going. So they're starting to emerge as the story. So we arrive at the MCG.
Round 18.
Round 18, Saturday night. Stakes could not be higher, both because we know what our KPIs are for the Essendon. It's their first year with a new coach in James Hird. They're going well enough to probably keep their spot in the 8, but they also really need a couple of wins to make sure of it. So it's an important night, and yeah, there were quite a number of things that happened that night, which even just thinking about it now just puts the biggest smile on my face.
Yeah, and I think the other thing to mention as well, I remember the build-up to that week, and I'm sure you've got the same type of Essendon friends that I have, in that the banter is there. We've lost 2 in a row. They're starting to make a little bit of a run. You know, they're in the finals conversation. They felt like this was the one that they could pinch from us. We were obviously really pissed off because we'd drawn with them the previous time and we knew we were better than them. And so we obviously demolished them. It was actually a pretty good game up until probably midway through the second quarter, in that they were with us.
Right to halftime, and then after halftime, Judd turned it on, Murphy turned it on, Eddie Betts kept on turning it on, Andrew Walker gave level 4 at the MCG a high five. It was just the most beautiful, if you're a Carlton fan, it is the most beautiful half of footy that you'd ever watch, because not only do you come out and, you just almost globetrot your way to a 13, 14 goal win, you're doing it against Essendon. Mm-hmm. And who doesn't love beating Essendon?
Yeah, they're we'll get to them, but they are my most hated team. I fucking hate Essendon, hate them, and it's because, and I think it's because of what had happened with Collingwood. That once you win the flag, you earn the respect. And so, yes, I hate Collingwood. Yes, I love the rivalry, and when we play against them, I love, it all sparks up again. But Essendon haven't done anything, and so they haven't earned that respect as a football club. Like Richmond are a rival, but they've won a few flags now, so I've got the respect. So beating Essendon the way we did that night was great because it shut them up, and then they'll obviously pop up in this story in a few minutes. But we then go on to beat North Melbourne away. It's an away game.
We go on another little run. So
another little run.
North Melbourne, and then Fremantle away, which also you'd think, they've dropped off by this point and shut up shop. So it was a bit of a fait accompli that we'll go over there and eventually get the points. I think, if memory serves me correctly, Andrew Walker took another hanger and he kicked his 50th goal for the year that day, which was a real big surprise. And I think we would just rap for him. And I love Walks. I think a lot of people really took him for granted. And it was just a shame that he got cut down when he did with his knee later in his career and his shoulder earlier in his career, because, man, he was special. Do you remember his debut? I know we're digressing, but do you remember his debut game?
I don't remember watching it because the memory doesn't kick in, but I remember sort of reflecting on it, seeing the highlights, and it was always the talked about thing with Walker. Every time he played a game of footy, every commentator would refer to that game that he played on debut. It was sort of the story of him.
It set the tone, really, because we knew that that's what he was capable of, and we got it all this year. He was jumping, he was running around, he was picked on his aerobic capacity to really motor up and down and have that leap and do something freakish. And we were luckily enough that we managed to find a bit of his position, and as we move later in his career, his body's able to endure a little bit more, so we can throw him around and it can really be that utility for us. I know we're jumping ahead now a couple of years, and sorry, listeners, but it's just a matter of when I don't know if you remember that goal he's kicked, he's gotten it off on the back 50, he's taken 6 bounces in the middle of Etihad Stadium.
Against the Saints.
On 50 against the Saints. That was unbelievable.
No, it was great.
I was on my gap year that year. I was walking down Sterrett Rothschild holding my phone watching the game, and all of a sudden I just yell like, "Oh my God!" And I get looks from the rest of my group that I'm at, and some bystanders just on the other side of the road going, "What is this guy doing?" And I'm like, "You won't understand." but I just had to. Anyway,
We digress.
we
That's okay.
digress.
That's okay.
On
I
this last
want
subject.
to. Whenever the passion comes out, I'm with it. I'm with it. So we've had a little mini run. So as you said, we smashed Essendon. We beat North by 18. We beat the D's very comfortably. We beat Freo away. And then really you look at the season and you're like, well, we've pretty much lost to the better teams. We haven't had a disappointing loss. Maybe the Bulldogs loss was one of the losses where it was like you should have won that game if you're going to be that top 4 team. And then we I don't know what it was. If it was complacency, if we could see the finish line, whatever it was, we end up losing the final 2 games of the season against the Hawks.
So we run, So we run into Hawthorn, and we never really beat Hawthorn. Back then, we never beaten Hawthorn, and it was start of a good thing. Just a bit of a pop quiz, Terry. In this game, what happens? Who kicks their first ever goal in this game?
Their first ever goal in this game for Carlton. Oof.
I'll give you a clue.
He's only kicked 2 in his career. Was it? Oh God, you put me on the spot. Was it Michael Jamison? Yes.
Bingo.
Come up with the clutch.
Yeah. So Jamison returns from injury. It was a bad shoulder injury, and at this point, Jared Waite's gone out of the team for the second time with a groin problem. So we needed to find something up forward, something that resembles a bit of a target, because, as we mentioned, the layer of depth is almost non-existent. We're relying on our best 22 guys to come in and make a difference. So we slip up against Hawthorn, slip up again against St Kilda the week after, and West Coast keep winning, and we have to unfortunately settle for this. So we know now, going into these final series, there's absolutely no room for error, no room for any mistakes, because if we lose, we're turfing a good coach out for no particular reason other than you didn't meet your KPI, and because of that, we're Carlton, we're going to sack you.
So we get to the end of the year and we are 10 points behind West Coast, who finished 4th. So we ended up the season with 14 wins, 7 losses and a draw. West Coast were 4th with 17 wins, 5 losses. Collingwood finishes on top with 20 bloody wins. Geelong has 19 wins, Hawthorn 18 wins. So tough year to crack the 4, really. And so, we do have a situation again where all of a sudden it's Essendon and Carlton. Carlton are coming off 2 losses as well. It was almost identical to the round 18 clash where we had come off 2 losses as well. And so the banter was back. The Essendon supporters were back.
The banter was back. The Essendon supporters were back. And, you love it. It's finals time. You love the big traditional clubs, getting up and about and getting in each other's face. And the difference here in this, guys, the last time we met, the stakes were high for both teams. But for this particular game, Essendon had nothing to lose. They made the finals first year under a new coach, fantastic. We made the finals for us. And, this was, in football terms, this was life and death for Brett Ratton. He knew he needed to win. So the pressure was on us. And then, I don't know, come elimination final day, I think the nerves, but there was also a big sense of calmness that we knew that if we played,
we knew on that day, for me, that if we played at our best and they played at their best, we were still better than them. I think that's where the calm comes from, because we'd shown it even throughout the year, whether you want to talk about the 2 games we played against them or just throughout the year. We knew we were a better team than them. And, we can say we're biased because we're Carlton, but we knew it. We were better than them.
We were like they often say, the ladder doesn't really reflect how good teams were. We were definitely the best team.
No doubt.
And to go out there and play Essendon, who just scraped into the finals, you knew it was going to be, it was pretty much going to be one-way traffic, even though, as they say, anything can happen in a final. You only need to look at 2013 for that to happen. But it was almost go out, the game starts, Essendon kick a few goals early.
We'll pause there for a second, because we start the game, I think we kicked 3 or 4 behinds in a row. And I remember having my Essendon mates sitting in a different section to me at the game and getting messages because they kicked the first 3 goals. And they're up and about, and I'm getting texties and I'm getting all this shit thrown at me because I very much embrace the Carlton arrogance, especially when it comes to these fucking Bombers scumbags. And so, yeah, obviously history goes on to show what happened. But yeah, so they kick 3 goals. Then we finally get going. What happens after that?
10 consecutive Carlton goals on a 40-point halftime lead later.
And the Bombers have laid down like the dead dogs that they are. When the going gets tough, they get going.
You're halfway booking a trip to Perth to go and face the Eagles at halftime, and then the second half was almost. It was just fun, and for someone who hadn't seen success up until then, and I'm still here 9 years later and still waiting for success. That was the best day at the footy for a while because we knew we were going to win. We knew we were going to win the final, and we were having the best fun doing it. I think Judd took a hanger in the second half, which was so much fun. And we just kept on piling on the pain. And, as he said, and the siren went and it was euphoric. And it was like, all right, we've done it. We're here. We really.
There's 3 points for me.
Trip.
There's the fact that we had done I've always said to win a flag, you've got to have finals disappointment. I know the Doggies are an anomaly there. But we had done the finals exits previously. So we'd come up against these finals moments. We had the heartbreak, which sort of drives you years later. So we had 2 of those. The other key important ingredient to this Bombers win in the final was that Judd didn't play anywhere near his best. It was the rest of them. It was Carazzo, it was Murphy, it was Gibbs. It was the rest of them. Eddie Betts. It was everyone, and it was a culmination of the notion that we were unpredictable.
It was the real nature of the way that we played, and it's like, yeah, we had Judd and he was a superstar, but we had that many different avenues and levers and a couple of different layers to our midfield, which were all quality, and they were all things that really led us and held us in good stead to show that we weren't just relying on Chris Judd, as it were, in 2008, 2009, 2010, when we started marching towards back, and that was mainly because Judd didn't fire. Judd got tagged out of the game, and we were absolutely done for. So on that level, it was the recognition for us to say, like, you know what, we've done it. We can do it, and we can get on the plane next week, and we'll be missing a few key players getting on the plane next week, but we can go over there and give it a shake.
At the end of the Essendon game, there was a moment where Bryce Gibbs runs into an open goal and sort of falls over himself in a sense. It was sort of contested, and he got up and sort of, I remember looking at the footage again, and he touches his shoulder. And, we didn't think much of it at the time, but we've celebrated the win. It's all good. We're going to Perth. And unfortunately, we lose Gibbs for that clash and Matty Cruiser. Do you remember, why did we lose Cruiser? What happened to him?
So Cruiser went off in round 24, and looking this up, the injury was described as a cyst on his foot. And he said in an interview, his foot went to sleep and couldn't get feeling in his foot up until about 2-3 weeks later. So it was a real bad injury. I think he describes it as we all know the terrible luck that Matthew Cruz has had with his body. He describes this as worse than the ACL. So we get on the plane, we go to Perth. We don't have Matthew Cruiser, we don't have Jared Waite, we don't have second ruckman in Sean Hampson. So
Gibbs.
we're missing a lot of quality, and we go over there and it's Subiaco, so it's going to be hostile, it's going to be loud, and it's going to be something that you just want to give your best in. And what's the best thing to do? You take the crowd out of the game early, you kick the first 3 goals unanswered, and go into quarter time with the lead, and you make them think, okay, shoot, what's going to happen now? And I think from memory, Josh Kennedy went off early that game with a bit of concussion and might have been out for the game, but he ended up coming back and ended up being a real thorn in our side. And yeah, you go through the game and, it ends up being they are always staying ahead. They were always staying ahead. Chris Judd was, again, a non-factor. He was very well tagged that night by Scott Selwood. And in the third quarter, we start mounting a fight back. But, the strength of the Eagles forwards against a backline, which was all very well and good on paper. But if you look at it, it starts thinning out very, 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 very quickly. So this was our backline for the game.
Chris Yarran, Michael Jamison, Marcus Davies,
Wow.
Nick Duigan in his first year of footy, Henderson, Laidler, Aaron Joseph, and the substitute Zach Tui in his first year. So it's not a backline to write home about, especially against the likes of Kennedy, Darling, Lynch, Lacroix, Dean Cox, who can go forward and pretty much do anything. Cox was probably one of the best ruckmen I've ever seen. So prove too strong for the back line. And then the final quarter, this is probably the most edge of my seat I've been watching a game. And I just remember sitting on this game, the teams would trade goals early. Then West Coast would kick a couple and go, a little bit. It would put the game beyond doubt almost for the home side. And then what happens then in the next 4 or 5 minutes would be absolute madness. So 5-minute warning goes off. Ellard, Garlett, and Walker all kick goals too. And all of a sudden, we've got all the run and we've got a sniff. And it's almost like, okay, this is going to either end in, absolute euphoria or absolute heartbreak. And what were you thinking at this point?
I remember sort of saying to myself, it's done. The Cruiser and Gibbs losses are too much for us. And I was sort of proud of the effort and whatnot, but I had all but given up on the game. And then I remember, like you said before, it was the red time. It was the count up clock. So that kicks in, and then we just keep kicking goals. And then I think it's when we were 9 points down that the commentary starts changing in terms of the tone in their voice. And then when we go 3 points down, it just goes up another level because we feel like there could be probably 45 seconds to a minute left, which is more than enough time to get it inside 50.
So there's a ball in on the far flank, almost at our attacking end. And bear in mind, we've lost the key forward to this point. Brett Thornton's gone off the ground, injured, concussed. Zach Tui's come on. It's his 12th game of AFL ever. So he's still learning what to do. He's come in and he's just grabbed this ball from the flick down and just booted it as far as he can into the forward line. And I remember this so vividly, and it triggers me every single time I see it. Glass and Walker lock up. Yep. And if you want to linken it up to a contest in today's footy and the modern game, it's almost Willie Rioli on Braden Maynard in that grand final. Was it a shepherd? Was it a hold? We say, of course.
The beauty, the benefit of the cleverness of what Glass did was that he took front position and he was holding Andrew Walker, but holding him with his right hand backwards. Now, different story if he's got back position and holding Walks sort of forwards. Now,
he did it beautifully. If he's holding it forward and if the umpire can see he's got a handful of jumper,
yep,
that's a free kick. We're singing our way to the MCG in a preliminary final against Geelong.
Yeah.
So Darren Glass is an absolute champion class player of the West Coast Eagles and the AFL. So he knows what he's doing.
Yeah.
That's really the moment there. And, the decisive call or non-call, is that it? Otherwise we've got a free kick at the top of the goal square, and instead the Eagles go up the other end and they don't end up kicking a goal, but they manage to hold on and go away and get the win, and ultimately giving Carlton its third finals exit, interstate finals exit in consecutive years by under a goal.
Yep. And it hurts. It hurts to this day.
It still hurts. And I write in that piece, I'm almost convinced that we would have beaten Geelong at the MCG that year and gone on to the grand final.
Oh my God. Because we had played them well, especially if we go back in 2010, it was a Monday afternoon when we beat them. They had no answer for the Amigos because what Geelong lacked was, they didn't lack a lot, but what they did lack was speed, and speed killed Geelong, and we had the speediest speedsters in the league.
Yeah, and we've done it to them twice in a row, and on the MCG, if you remember, it was late season 2009, we beat them up. We beat them on the MCG, again, getting them with the speed, and I just think you look back on it, and it's just the biggest opportunity lost at what might have been. And could have you imagined a potential Carlton Collingwood grand final that year?
Mate, it would have been...
Yeah. We had the top-end talent. We had the two best midfielders in the competition. Judd was the raging Brownlow favourite. Now, didn't go on to win it, but it was the raging favourite. We had Mark Murphy, who won the Coaches Association award that year. We had three players in our forward line finish in the top 12 of the Brownlow medal, two of them kicking over 50 goals. Mm-hmm. We had almost all the ingredients. And I think, as we're coming to learn a lot from today's footy, is that you need the quality layers of depth.
Yeah, your bottom six, that bottom six notion
that we didn't have. Like, even looking at the bottom six players in that, semi-final team, a lot of them granted are out of the system now, but they'd struggle to make the game. They'd struggle to get a game in any other team that year. And you look at, these were our depth players for that year. You had Simon White, who was in his first couple of years of footy and again coming off an injury. Ryan Houlihan, who I loved, but he was on his absolute last legs. Marcus Davies played in that semi-final team, who don't really know why he got any AFL games, to be honest. Mark Austin, same boat. Paul Bauer, Brock McLean before he had his moment the year later against Richmond. And then there was the draftees who it was in that period where we just could not draft a footballer to save ourselves. And with the likes of Matthew Watson, Andrew McInnes, and a young Zach Tui who was learning the game, the depth was pretty much non-existent. None of the rookies, except for Ed Kerner, get on to play a game of AFL football in their career. So it's just a matter of, you look at the what ifs and the how and why and how could have happened. And yet, remarkably, it gets to the end of that year. Geelong go on to, thankfully, dethrone Collingwood and win the flag. And you're thinking, right, we need a key forward. We need another outside midfielder who can run, because at this point in his career, Simpson's about to go to half back. And we just need that other player who's a little bit better than serviceable at AFL level. And we think, okay, maybe we can get that in the trades period, and we go on and do absolute diddly squat.
Well, I think, just to go back a few steps, I think the Simo comment is spot on. I think at the time we had Chris Yarran bubbling, and we thought, well, if we can get him to become that midfielder and then put Simo back to that half-back flank, that might be the answer. And we had also drafted...
Talking about Chris Yarran makes me sad.
Yeah, I know. We had also drafted Luke Mitchell, he gave him the number 25. We thought he might be the forward, the heir apparent to Fev. Obviously, it goes on to prove otherwise. But yeah, so just to sort of wrap up the season, we know what happens with the flag and whatnot. Just to look at the awards, so the club awards. Now, Murphy, and I'll take a few minutes to spend. I'll spend a few minutes on Murph because he's my favourite player. Now, Murphy had just, it was, number one draft picks don't always come to fruition, even though they probably, there's the pressure on them to do that.
He was the second best midfielder in the comp. Behind Danes one, he was the best midfielder in the comp.
Yeah, and people forget how good he was that year. He had a better year than Juddy. Juddy had won the Brownlow in 2010, and I think obviously all the attention went on him. Now, there's also a double-edged sword to that, because Murphy was a beneficiary of the attention that Judd had, in that he didn't cop as much of a tag because Juddy was sort of carrying that burden. But it was so pleasing to see him really elevate and, have that breakout year, 5 years in the system, that kind of thing. So he finished.
Mark Murphy finished that year in the top line of betting for the Brownlow the following year.
Yeah, people forget he was literally in the top 5 players in the competition. Like, we had 2 of the best 5 players in the competition. And so Murphy goes on to win the best and fairest by over 200 votes, 678 votes to Chris Judd, who finished second, and Bryce Gibbs, who finished third, which is also, I should say, another key point, because all of a sudden it was like, well, hang on, if Murphy's done this, because Gibbs had a good year, not as good as Murphy, obviously, but he had a really good year. And then it was like, well, if Gibbs can just go to that next level in 2012, we're bubbling here. And, Scotland finishes 4th.
It's important that you mentioned Bryce
5th.
Gibbs, actually, because I noted before the preseason, he'd started his career almost playing off halfback and running into the midfield. And this is the year where he switched flanks. So instead of becoming that really attacking defender, he became that attacking midfielder who had the license to run in, get the ball on the outside, had become that, third receiver after the handball chainer out of the middle, get the ball and go for broke it at 50 meters out. And most of the time he'd get it. So that was his goal. And Gibbs kicked over 20 goals that year and polled over 10 votes in the Brownlow medal. It was behind Murphy and Judd. He was the highest polling blue. So that was the year where Gibbs also started to really elevate his game.
Yep. I mean, we had guys like Mitch Robinson who had a pretty good year. He won the Blues Coterie Fierce Award that year. He also won the Spirit of Carlton Encouragement Award with Kate Simpson. We spoke about Yaz. He won the Women of Carlton Ambassador Award. Scotland won the Best Clubman Award, and Nick Dygan won the Best First Year Player Award. So you're right. It's top end there, middle end kind of average, and then the bottom end week to week just
falls away. And ultimately, that wins you a flag. You're only as good as what your bottom 6 players are.
100%. 100%.
You look at some of the last couple of premiership teams, Richmond and their layer and quality of depth. Someone goes out, they've got that squad mentality, but they're all cut from the same cloth. And, they've got their 3 or 4 superstars in Cochin, Martin, Rewalt, they had Rance, and I say, I regard Shane Edwards as an absolute superstar. But every single other person in that team knows what their role is, and they go out and they execute their role. It's like, Ivan Solder, your job is to be, second ruckman, tall forward. He was a guy that had come from playing soccer. He hadn't heard of AFL, but his job was to use his big frame. He had the big frame and bowl people over, and if he took a mark in the forward line, kick a goal. Camden McIntosh, he's a premiership player. His job is, he might not be the most skillful player, but his job is to always be that +1 at the contest because of his enormous running and aerobic capacity. And I think that's definitely something that we lack, not only in that list, but in the years to come and following that. And even now, we're still looking for guys to fill these certain roles, and everyone's trying to be that inside midfielder who could help Chris Judd or help a Patrick Cripps. Everyone's trying to be, everything, and the recruiters had been trying to recruit that jack of all trades, I can do everything perfectly type of guy. Whereas I think now they don't really exist, and you sort of need to look, and we can talk for hours and do another whole podcast on the changes and what's going to happen now with the unfortunate COVID situation and how that's going to really impact football. But if you look fundamentally at what our shortfallings were that year, it's the layer of depth, and it's also just the failure to really capitalize on the big weeks and keep that momentum running. I think eventually when we got on a roll, we were unstoppable. No one could really touch us or get near us. But when there were the weeks where we were a little bit off, we paid for it, and it ultimately cost us.
Mm-hmm. Yep, absolutely. I will get towards the end. I've got one question. We'll both answer it. I might be putting you on the spot, but what's your favorite moment from 2011?
Favorite moment from 2011? I think it's like individual moment was just being there for Walker's mark, just being there that night. Game was over. You're sitting there enjoying yourself. You're not expecting someone to take mark of the decade, and to do it on Jake Carlisle as well is also a bit of a chuckle. But just to be there that evening and just witness that and say, yep, I was there for the greatest mark ever, which still to this day, no one has given me a good enough reason as to why that wasn't mark of the year. I think we're all still waiting for that, but it's just being there for that moment was unreal, and going to the game knowing that, yep, this is how we're going to play, and going there thinking that you're going to win most weeks, and not only getting the win, but seeing your team put on a show. And, it's just the fun of going to the footy that year. It was just a really fun year where, that for the 2 hours of the week on the weekend, you can go there, you're going to see a good team play football, and it happens to be your team. And you just go there with a smile. More often than not that year, you'd leave with a massive smile. And it was just fun. It was just a fantastic time. And as supporters, we yearn and we pray and we hope to God that those times can come back and soon, and we can go to the footy and we can enjoy what it's like, being a team that has a good year.
Yeah. My favorite moment from 2011 was walking. I'll never forget it, because we had been starved of final success, but it was walking. I got goosebumps reminiscing about it, but walking out of the MCG for the first time into sort of the open air. And we went to the pub, and we were the kings of the town. Like, the city was ours, Like, Carlton had owned Melbourne that night. It was just, oh my goodness.
I might get into trouble telling this story, but as I said, I go to the footy a lot with my uncle at that time. And at the time, he had dinner with his girlfriend's family, who's now his wife, and parents of the most adorable niece and nephews. But he was dating someone whose family was all Essendon supporters, and was going to dinner with them that night. And just walking out of the ground, and I nudge him. I'm like, "You're going to enjoy your dinner tonight, are you?" And I'm like, "Mate, I'm going to go in there with my Carlton scarf, and I'm not going to take it off for a single second." Sure enough. So it was just amazing, and the feeling of happiness. And I also remember walking out of the ground that day after we'd just won the first final that we'd won for about 10 years. It was just absolutely euphoric, and hopefully one day it comes back soon.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, mate, I thoroughly enjoyed that. It is good to go back and reminisce on the highs and the lows. That, for me, that just flew by. So I want to thank you for, first of all, reaching out and writing the piece, and secondly for joining me here today. And if I'll have you again, mate, if you'll come on again, I'd love to go through another year with you, or a couple more, because I really enjoyed that.
No, absolutely, mate. It was a pleasure to sit down and write it, and pleasure to do it. And I've loved having this chat with you here today. So looking forward to doing it again.
Awesome, mate. Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That was season 2011. If you have any requests for any specific years that you'd like Jono and myself to go back and reminisce on week by week, please be sure to get in touch with me and we can make it happen. Stay safe, stay isolated. Let's just do whatever we've got to do to make sure the footy comes back as soon as it possibly can. And with that, Jono, thank you, and go the Mighty Blues.
Go Blues. Thanks, everyone.